Chimpanzees are often looked at as cute animals due to how similar they are to us humans. But what most people fail to realize is that chimpanzees can become brutal killing machines, capable of ripping the limbs off of people with ease. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying story of the Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary disaster. Welcome to Final Affliction. The following story is regarded as one of the most brutal and horrifying chimpanzee attacks in recorded history. Our story takes place in the tropical jungle of Sierra Leone. Inside this green paradise, a wide variety of plant life and wild animals flourished until one day, war, bringing with it a never-before-seen demand for land, fuel, and resources, decimated the once beautiful landscape of this lush utopia, and none suffered the consequences harder than Sierra Leone's population of chimpanzees. What was once a thriving community of chimpanzees, bound by unbreakable family bonds and consisting of about 30,000 chimpanzees, was reduced to a mere couple of thousand due to the destruction of their natural habitat and the savage culling of these beautiful creatures by the jungle's own inhabitants, who would usually kill the parents before taking the children to be sold as pets in the local black market. This prompted several animal rights activists to call for the construction of havens where these animals would be protected from the vile greed and unceasing savagery of humans, in hopes of preserving this now endangered species. The Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary is one such haven. Located near the capital of Sierra Leone, the sanctuary has been a shelter for orphaned and traumatized chimpanzees for nearly 30 years. The abused chimpanzees that sought refuge in the sanctuary were scarred by their years of abuse. For the majority of them, the slaughter of their families was their first introduction to humanity. Some had their teeth smashed in or were confined in cramped cages for days. Others were even made to consume alcohol for the amusement of humans. Regarded as a tourist attraction, Tacugama attracts visitors from across the world, bringing light to the consequences and cruelty of human expansion upon local wildlife. In 2006, Alan Robertson, Gary Brown, and Richie Goody were subcontractors working on the nearly complete American embassy when they were offered the chance to visit the Tacugama Chimpanzee Refuge. The exciting offer, made by their friend and local guide, Melvin Mama, was met with unanimous approval, and the four men called for a taxi and began the journey toward Tacugama. The cab, which carried the three construction workers along with their close friend, made the 30-minute trip up a mountainside to Tacugama on Sunday, April 23rd. As they sat inside the taxi, the four men admired the gorgeous countryside as their friend, Melvin, told of interesting facts about the country's rich history and described the jungle's stunning natural beauty. Unbeknownst to them, as their car mounted the final steep slope into the 100-acre preserve, things had gone horribly wrong on the other side. Workers inside the refuge were in the process of feeding the animals when a group of them suddenly became enraged and managed to escape the electrified fence surrounding the compound, sparking one of the most brutal and gruesome chimpanzee assaults in recorded history, as the chimps rampaged and tore apart anyone who was misfortunate enough to have crossed their path. The newly formed pack consisted of 31 young adults and was led by a chimp known as Bruno, a 270-pound, 6-foot-tall alpha who suffered from severe trauma after he was taken from his mother as an infant and sold on a market for a measly $30. It's not always the biggest and most aggressive male that commands the troop in chimpanzee culture. Instead, the elders of the pack choose a deserving leader. Even if a particularly powerful male defeats and coerces all of his rivals into submission, the chimp society of elders may not give him their blessing to lead. Alphas are charged with the burdensome duty of looking after everyone, and if necessary, defending the entire pack down to its weakest member. Aside from being the undisputed alpha, Bruno was massive for a chimpanzee, easily towering over every other member of his pack. It seemed Bruno held a deep-seated hatred for humans, despite the kindness later shown to him by sanctuary workers. Hatred which the four men, alongside their driver, Issa Canoe, were about to become all too familiar with. The vehicle soon came across a closed fence meant to keep unannounced visitors out. As the men sat waiting inside their car, Issa blasted his horn in the hopes that someone would come out and open the gates for them. The sound of the car's horn, however, would attract the attention of the last thing the men wanted that morning: Bruno. Bruno soon emerged from deep within the forest, accompanied by his group of loyal, bloodthirsty followers. The chimpanzees soon encircled the taxi, screaming and banging at its doors and windows as the group watched in horror from the inside. Bruno was so big that the group initially mistook him for a gorilla. Quickly realizing the danger they were in, Issa put the car in reverse and hit the gas pedal as hard as he could. As the car suddenly flung backward, Bruno gave chase, easily overtaking the speeding vehicle and standing atop the car's hood, screaming angrily as he displayed his terrifyingly sharp teeth before he began bashing the car's hood and front windshield. As the car continued to roll down the hill, Bruno would shift his focus on the rear back windows, smashing through the glass and beginning his assault by viciously mauling Melvin, biting his hand and viciously shaking his head, tearing through flesh and ripping bone as Melvin screamed and tried to fight him off with the help of his friends, but to no avail. Desperate to escape their predicament, one of the men told Issa to shift the automobile into forward gear. Upon doing so and hitting the gas pedal once again, the vehicle abruptly comes to a stop and veers off in a new direction. Bruno, whose sharp teeth now sank as deep as they could inside Melvin's arm, was caught off guard by the sudden motion and was flung back out of the same window. Alan and Gary gripped Melvin by the legs just before he was dragged out by Bruno, and the two men began hoisting him back inside the car. After the shock wore off, the pain began to set in. Melvin watched in utter horror and disbelief as almost half of his hand, along with 3 of his fingers, was now gone. Gary attempted to calm Melvin down, tearing off a piece of cloth from his shirt and wrapping it around Melvin's hand, which now resembled little more than a drooping mass of skin that was loosely tied to clumps of flesh. Issa was beginning to lose his grip. He was a local of Sierra Leone and knew what chimps were capable of. He had witnessed with his own eyes how a horde of chimpanzees could tear apart a human within seconds. Issa threw caution to the wind and continued pushing forward, driving right through the bloodthirsty horde toward the locked gate, with the intent of ramming through it as the others pleaded for him to slow down. Eventually reaching top speed, the vehicle collided with the heavy metal gates, a collision so violent that it briefly knocked everyone unconscious. When he eventually came to, Gary was awoken by the gut-wrenching sound of Melvin's screams. Gary looked around the now run-down vehicle, only to notice everyone had vanished. Gary turned his eyes to where the screams were coming from, only to witness that Bruno had dragged helpless Melvin out of the car as the vicious horde began ravaging him. Adamant on saving his friend, Gary picked up a sharp wooden log after exiting the vehicle, letting out an angry roar in hopes of attracting Bruno's attention. Most wild chimpanzees shy away from direct confrontation with humans, even though they are much stronger physically, as a human's natural posture makes them appear taller and more intimidating to the chimpanzee. Domesticated chimpanzees, however, or at least the ones who spent a good portion of their lives living among humans like Bruno did, quickly realized the physical advantage they possess over humans, both in terms of strength and agility. Bruno, who accepted the challenge, began the charge towards Gary, pounding and flailing his arms around as he stood on his back legs to appear taller. Bruno, who was 6 feet tall, easily towered over Gary, who was only 5'9" tall, but Gary remained calm. As the beast leaped onto him, Gary raised up his weapon, striking Bruno in the neck and knocking him down. Bruno attempted to get up, but Gary wouldn't let him. Bruno's pack froze with terror as Gary pummeled Bruno over and over with the wooden log. Bruno, who later gave up and began showing submissive behavior towards Gary, retreated back and soon vanished amid the ocean of rustling leaves and dangling vines. Witnessing the defeat of their leader, the angry horde of chimps grew ever quieter as they dissipated, dissolving into the forest from where they came. After his victory, Gary turned his eyes toward Melvin. Trying to pull him up, Gary noticed Melvin could not stand on his own as it appeared Bruno had torn off most of his right foot. After making sure the horde was gone, Gary informed Melvin he'd go and find help. As Gary traversed the unfamiliar forest, he eventually came upon Richie and Alan asking them to go and find help while he tended to Melvin. But before they left, Gary noticed Issa was nowhere to be seen. When asked about Issa's whereabouts, Richie informed Gary that after Issa's attempt at breaching the thick metal gate failed, Issa exited the vehicle and climbed over it himself, leaving the rest of his group to fend for themselves as he headed toward the main road. Gary nodded in disappointment before warning the two men to stay vigilant and watch their backs as he headed back to where he left Melvin. After Gary eventually got back to Melvin, he tied another piece of cloth around his right foot, which was nothing more than a dangling mass of torn flesh. Melvin leaned on Gary's back for support as the two made their way toward the main road, eventually coming across a military van. Apparently, Richie and Alan had managed to reach a military patrol unit and inform the soldiers of Melvin and Gary's whereabouts. The van soon picked them up and rushed Melvin toward the nearest medical facility where he would get treatment for his injuries. Gary breathed a sigh of relief as he knew Melvin and the others would be okay, yet he still couldn't believe or fully process the events of this horrific day he'd gone through. While Gary, Melvin, Richie, and Alan all made it out safely, a crueler fate awaited Issa, who was later found bloody and torn apart. His jawless, disemboweled body ravaged beyond recognition as the angry horde of chimpanzees seemed to have caught up with him, tearing all four of his limbs from his body before feasting on his remains. Bruno, on the other hand, could never be found. While 27 of the 31 of the sanctuary's escapees were eventually retrieved, Bruno was among the 4 who were not. Many attempts at locating and bringing back Bruno were launched, and all were met with failure. Even though sightings of Bruno are regularly reported to this day, she still manages to somehow evade his pursuers, almost as if he's developed heightened senses that warn him when he's being hunted by humans. Fitting, considering the amount of abuse he'd suffered through because of humans. The group will never forget their close encounter with death in the forest of Sierra Leone. Gary in particular suffered from nightmares for months after the terrifying incident. He considers himself lucky he'd managed to fight off Bruno and rescue Melvin, and that he'd been able to reach safety unlike Issa, who would tragically be ambushed by the savage beasts, screaming in horror as he succumbed to his final affliction.